On this week's episode, we get very scholarly with soon-to-be PhD Anna Posbergh. Anna's current focus is on the ongoing testosterone regulation case within women's athletes in the Olympics. We dive deep into science, ethics, and the future of where all this is heading, and much, much more. As our host Tyler said best, the beauty of having a conversation with Anna is that she is able to convey such technical information into practical understanding. Finally, this episode of the Iron Huddle Podcast is sponsored by Torque Strength and Conditioning. Torque is a great place to work out and offers a variety of programs such as Torque GPP, Torque Barbell, Torque Fit, personal coaching and wellness, and youth and teen development. We hope you enjoy the podcast.
So we're lucky enough today to have Anna Posbergh with us, and we're going to do something a little bit different than normal. We're going to talk about her a little bit, her journey. We're also going to go into a few topics she brought along with us that she has experience covering and are important to her, and it should be fun. So to start off with, Anna, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background? I know you're one hell of a hard worker from watching your workouts, but kind of tell us what your background is in athletics and your education.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm from Stillwater, Minnesota. In high school and junior high, I did a little bit of everything. I ran cross country, I played basketball, I played volleyball. I did a little of everything, but being an only child, team sports weren't really my thing. And so, and I was always really fast. And so I started doing track when I was in 7th grade. And it just kind of stuck to the point where I started doing an indoor season. I went to nationals as a high schooler. I was an All-American, and then I was lucky enough to go to Minnesota and compete there as a pole vaulter. In high school, I did long jump, pole vault, 100, 200, and then if we were hurting for people, I did the 400 begrudgingly. But pole vault was my main thing, and so I did that in college, and then then I went to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, and I did my master's there. So even though I was a pole vaulter and did track, I was actually really passionate about English at the time in undergrad, and so my undergrad was in English, math, and kinesiology because I couldn't figure out what I wanted.
So you have 3?
I had 2 majors and a minor. English was for me. Math was because my parents are engineers. I didn't think I'd get a job, and then kines was because all my friends were there, and I really liked sports, and so I just kind of picked up all these things. And then I did a master's in literary and cultural studies, which is a really fancy way of saying English, for my master's, and I realized I didn't really want to be stuck in a library all the time. I was also a GA at Carnegie Mellon for their track team, which was a highlight of my day every day, and so I figured, why would I do something that I don't want to do when there are things that I'm clearly passionate about? And so then on a whim, I applied to do a PhD in kinesiology after having not taken kines classes in a while. I was lucky enough to get offers from Penn State, Maryland, and Berkeley out in California, and Maryland was the one that seemed like the right fit. And so I'm a PhD student out there now. I'm finishing up my 2nd year. I have hopefully 2 years left, and I write about testosterone regulation in track and field, international, in the international circle, and basically sex testing and the ethics of it now, which is what I do.
Very interesting. Yeah. Damn. All of us are looking at her like deers in the head, like, holy shit.
It's a very timely topic because of some of the, what do you even call it? Like the ladies, the men who become ladies who are competing in
transgender type.
Transgender.
Yeah, like in powerlifting right now, I know USPA.
And then there was that one person that won Masters Nationals, right, in weightlifting.
I'm not sure.
Well, I can't remember what her name was, but she was a man, and she had gender reassignment and competes now as a female. And she competed in USAW Masters, I believe,
Yeah, I
and
believe
won.
so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and I knew that Anna was bright, but I didn't know it was that in depth. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, yeah.
That's incredible.
It's
So
really cool, yeah.
Thanks. I much prefer to just come in, get my lifts done, chat about things that aren't so cerebral. It's fun.
So let's talk about that for a quick
Yeah.
second, because did you say 3 majors and a minor, or 3 minors and a major while
2
your
and
undergrad?
1. I had 3 areas of study primarily.
While you were a collegiate athlete doing pole vaulting?
Yeah, I did go all 4 years for vaulting. I had a really awesome opportunity because I had a lot of academic scholarships. I didn't pay for college.
It
my
just gets
first
better.
year. And then my 2nd year, because I was an engineering major when I went into college,
Okay.
and so all my scholarships were through engineering. I didn't want to be connected athletically, because I heard a lot of pressures about taking an athletic scholarship, and I was like, I don't think I want to do that, because I had really awesome academic opportunities. And so after I switched to English, all my scholarships went away, and college is really expensive, and so I didn't like paying for college my second year. Even though I had some scholarships still, I didn't like paying half tuition, I guess. And so I had a really awesome opportunity to be like an RA or a CA for student athletes instead, and that would have paid for everything then. And so it was a hard decision to walk away, but ultimately I knew I wanted to go to grad school. I knew that academics was more for me, and I didn't want to destroy my body. And so I made the tough decision to kind of walk away from that. But I had an awesome opportunity to kind of grow academically, work with some really good scholars, and not pay tuition. So I didn't go all 4 years, fortunately.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'd been able to do everything I wanted if I'd stayed an athlete.
Well, it sounds like you found yourself in the right place today.
Yeah. It was a hard path to get here, but I really enjoy what I do at the end of the day.
Well, I asked originally because balancing all of that is incredibly tough. So even coming up with so many amazing options you had to decide from is a great problem to have.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It was, and even in undergrad, like coming to the U, because I went to the University of Minnesota for my undergrad, and that was my last choice. That was my backup. My dad's a professor there. I did not want to be there, and I had some really awesome opportunities at the University of Southern California, Washington University in St. Louis.
Oh, yeah.
Those were some really, really awesome opportunities that ultimately, like, I picked the U. But just very, very did not want to go, but it turned out to be the perfect decision. I was very upset my freshman year being there, but I loved all the opportunities I had at the U. I loved being in Minneapolis, and I loved doing the sport that I loved.
When did you graduate from the U?
When?
Yeah.
2016.
Okay.
Yeah, so 3
I think
years.
that happens a lot too, where you go into something not really confident or happy, and you end up, making the most of it, which turns into one of the best decisions you ever made because of what you're able to, take with what you have.
Yeah, absolutely. It was totally a financial decision to go there. Being from like a very middle class family, it was very much a financial decision to go there. But it was the perfect school for me.
Awesome.
I don't think I would have thrived anywhere else like I did at the U.
And still today you're pretty, with everything you're doing, studying for your PhD currently, right?
Yes,
and
yeah.
that's coming up. Are you going to be graduating pretty soon from that then?
So I take qualifying exams the end of this summer. So it's basically I've taken PhD classes, and now I get tested on that. And if I pass, I'm allowed to start my dissertation. If I fail, I am removed from the program.
Oh
so
my goodness, is that stressful?
A little, but they never let you take them unless you're ready usually.
Okay.
And
that's
so
cool.
I've had 2 years of classes, and I take those in August this year. Hopefully we'll pass, and then I'm done in 2 years after I write my dissertation.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Thanks.
And I think it's cool that you have a great balance of your athletic performance, but you still do on the side, which where I met you, you're just
Yes.
running like crazy, lifting like crazy.
Yeah.
Your desires to balance that between all the scholarly ventures you have is incredible.
Thank you. It's necessary, I think. I couldn't imagine being in my office all the time around. The people I work with are so brilliant, but they are very exhausting at the end of the day.
Yeah.
To hear about everything going on, it takes an incredible amount of intellectual effort that I couldn't do 40 hours a week. And
Yeah.
so running is my break, lifting is also my break. You meet very different people at the gym and at the track, and I love that diversity of the backgrounds of people that I meet and their stories and their interests and their athletic journey to get there. I think is really what motivates me to
That's
keep going.
awesome.
Yeah.
And it sounds like because of your background and your future too, that we may need to, when you're in town in the future, to have you on and talk about some topics that you're going to have the fact and scientific background with, and we're going to have hypothesis. So if we don't agree with you, we may not have you back, but no, I'm just kidding.
We're just gonna talk shit. Don't worry about science.
Yeah. So let's start with one of the reasons we brought you on today too, is to get all your knowledge, experience that you've written on, all the stuff that you
Yeah.
are knowledgeable about that we're going to try and learn from and maybe even debate some stuff with you, but
Absolutely.
just have fun doing topics. So the one that you suggested, I know you said it earlier, but it was sex testing and testosterone regulation.
Yes.
And within the Olympics or all around? You kind of lead us here.
Sure. So, sex testing and testosterone regulation is the newest form of sex testing most recently. in 2011, the international governing body for track and field, it really shows up in track and field, at least I found in my research, or at least that's where I focus mainly. So they started using testosterone in 2011 to kind of differentiate between men and women's categories in track and field. But that's actually part of a really long history that sometimes doesn't get ignored, but in popular media sometimes gets ignored. Not by scholars, but by popular media. So sex testing has actually been around since the 1932 Olympics, when there was a German high jumper who was a man who posed as a woman. That was during the Nazi regime, and Hitler wanted to win a lot of gold medals.
Yeah.
And so that's actually the only case where a man posed as a woman. But because that happened, people were like, oh my gosh, this is going to be an issue. We need to find a way to separate men and women in sport, because there is a performative difference. And like, if we have men infiltrating women's sports, that's just not fair to women. And so they implemented, at first they called him, popularly they're called nude parades. So women would walk by naked in front of 3 doctors, and they would look to see if they were a woman. And so that continued for decades, actually.
Really?
And so,
Did
yes.
men have to do that as well?
Nope, just women. Just women. Yes, just women. And so then they moved on to using chromosomes. I think chromosomes was the next one that they used, and so they looked to see if there was an XX chromosome or an XY chromosome, because typically women have XX chromosomes and men have XY chromosomes. But they found, especially in athletes, that's not universally the case, actually. So sometimes you can have XXY chromosomes, or you can have 44 chromosomes. There are lots of different variations of XXXY. And so they had a lot of athletes that had false positives or false negatives, and so they were like, well, this isn't good, let's go on to something else. And so then they started using bar bodies, which is associated with, I didn't review this. It's associated with a different characteristic to separate men and women, but then they found there were other loops and gaps within that too, because sometimes they had false negatives and false positives. And so this recurrent false negative, false positive continued until actually the Olympics banned them in 1991, and the international track, the IAAF, banned it in 1999. So sex testing was gone then in the starting of the century. But then Caster Semenya stepped on the scene in 2009. Who is an incredible South African female runner who is tall, muscular, black, and looks like a man by some standards. And so when she stepped on the scene and won in Berlin in the 800, people started crying, "This is not a woman, this is a man," which prompted then the idea of sex testing to come back. But they tried all these different methods, so like external, like looking at people, bar bodies, chromosome tests, none of that stuck. And so they said, why don't we look at testosterone? Because testosterone seems like the reason why men do better than women. Obviously, because men have, obviously in quotations, because men have higher levels of testosterone, it must be linked then to performative differences. So in 2011, the International Track and Field Governing Body implemented a testosterone regulation for female athletes only. And so it set a limit basically and said, if you're above this limit, you are considered a man, and if you're below this limit, you're a woman. If you test over this limit and you want to compete as a woman, you have to take hormone suppressors for a certain amount of time to be able to compete in the female category. There was no limit for men, so they could either take the hormone suppressors if they passed this line, or they could compete with men. This continued for a couple years until Dudi Chand, who is an Indian sprinter, was accused also. When she took this test, she was, they found that she violated this testosterone rule, and they said, this is a man, and she said, no, I'm a woman, I've been a woman my whole life, like I was raised as a girl. And so she fought this law, and she won actually in 2015, and they appealed the testosterone regulation. The IAAF was given, because they had no science to back it up, was the problem. Okay. And so they were given 2 years to revise the policy, get the science to back it up, and then they were given a chance to re-implement it, quote, more fairly. So then in 2018, they got a year extension. In 2018, they came up with this new rule, which was a lower level of testosterone, actually, because it was originally 10 nanomoles per liter, and this new one in 2018 was 5 nanomoles per liter.
So real quick, let me ask you that.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I'm just
no. This is amazing. Yeah, this is amazing. We need to just take all this in for a moment.
Yeah.
And just embrace all this. So, So basically, to break this down from my understanding, you guys hop in too from what you understand, but they created a limit on how much testosterone a woman could have in her body, essentially, to compete fairly in the Olympics. And 10 was on a scale from 0 to 10 or 1 to 10?
No.
And what did that base it on?
So
10?
Yeah, so 10 was the limit.
Okay.
It
The maximum
goes,
that a woman could have in her body was 10?
Yes, they found, apparently the study, they didn't have the study at the time, but the recent study they came out with for their new policy found that women typically had between, so the testosterone they look at, you actually have two kinds of testosterone in your body. You have total testosterone and you have free testosterone. And the free testosterone is the one that they tested. That's lower than your total amount.
Okay.
But that's the kind that you use in performative action.
Okay.
And so it's the kind that your body can actually synthesize and use to be fast, to be strong. And so that's what they look to test, not the total, but the amount you could use basically. And 10, they found women were typically between, I think, like 2 and 6 or 7. If I haven't looked at the study in a while, but I think it's between like 2 and 7. So like 10 is very, very generous.
Yeah.
And then they found men were 30, 40.
That much of a difference?
Yeah, that's what they said. That's what they said. In the general population, that's what they said. And so they thought 10 was a very reasonable number. And so then they went back and if that answers your question.
So then, it does. And then I
Yeah.
think you were going to, if I read, so I did read your article, and I don't know if I'm understanding it correctly, and maybe you're going to hit on this point. I think you briefly did. That they then lowered that number from 10 to 5?
Yes, they did. And so in 2018, after giving their extension to revise their policy, they lowered it actually to 5 nanomoles per liter. And they said, well, we have the science now to back this up. We did a study. We went to the World Championships in a certain year, and we tested everyone's testosterone, men and women, and we found the bell curve for women. We found the bell curve for men. And 5 is a very reasonable number, and if like women go over that, that's just not typical. That's not within the usual range. That's above the 99th percentile. And so we think 5 is a very fair limit, and anything above that should be considered male. The problem with this study was of all the athletes they took, they had a great sample size. They had over 5,000.
Okay, I was going to ask, like, what was the population size?
It was a very good sample size for this study. The problem was, as soon as this study came out and was released, of course scholars went back because you have to be able to replicate quantitative data. You should be able to, be able to replicate it to make sure it's valid and well done, especially if there's only one study proving this. When scholars went back and tried to replicate the data, they found error points for 33% of the data. They found data points that did not exist from the set that they said was there. They found duplicated data, and they also found, most concerningly, in my opinion, that athletes that had been caught doping at that particular event were not removed from the study.
Oh, wow, really? That's huge.
We're actually included in that. Yep.
So, I mean, were these people just tested at one point in time? Because can't your levels of testosterone vary?
I think they were taken. I know they for sure were taken from one world championship. I think it was 3 different events or 3 different competitions. I think if I'm remembering correctly, it was 3 different ones that they were taken from. So they had a couple times here and there that they took this data. It wasn't just a one-time all, but they were unable to replicate the data sufficiently. Plus, the IAAF wouldn't release the full data set to them to replicate. They also did not remove any of the athletes found doping, which were 11 athletes total.
That caused a huge skew in the evidence. Like,
Yes.
why would they not? Sorry,
Yes.
I'm
No, you're
very
fine.
surprised by that.
You're totally fair. And the athletes that were caught doping were female athletes too, which certainly then skews your data a little bit. I think there might have been 1 or 2 men, but a majority of them were female that were in there.
When was
But
this
those are
again?
just the ones that got caught too.
Yep.
By the way.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. You don't
Yes.
know. So is that some kind of getting off tangent? But if you have someone who uses PEDs, and then all of a sudden they cycle off for competition time, will that still keep them at a higher level, right?
Right, yeah. The interesting thing too about testosterone, so I talk about like this free testosterone is the testosterone that you use to be able to compete and to excel in whatever sport you do. There's another aspect to testosterone too. So you have endogenous testosterone, which is testosterone that your body naturally produces, and then you have exogenous testosterone, which is like supplements, doping, steroids. That's ones that you've taken into your body and aren't natural. So within a lot of female athletes, I think they found the percentage is almost 300 times higher in female athletes. women have this syndrome where they produce a lot of testosterone, but their body can't synthesize it.
Okay.
So even though they have these higher levels, it's as if they didn't even have that extra. It doesn't matter.
So they don't have like the receptors or whatever to actually to use it appropriately, like men do. Is that kind of the way I'm understanding it?
Say that again for me?
Like if they have those higher levels,
Yeah.
their body just doesn't know how to use it.
It's like a partial sort of like their receptors just aren't responding to it.
Yeah.
It doesn't. You could have like an influx of like 100,000 that would die, but like it wouldn't matter because it caps out how much they can synthesize.
Would they then have higher free testosterone levels as well as total?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
So within that list, I think if I read your report right, your article, I think you had mentioned. So was it based off the 5,000 or how many athletes was it? I think I had read you said that 24 of them had registered in the higher amount, the 99th percentile had higher amounts of the testosterone recorded, and 9 of them were caught doping. So that means like 15 were still above that level 5, but they're not going to be allowed to compete. Did I understand that right?
Yeah, basically. So even though they're caught doping, some were above the limit. The other interesting thing about that study, even though we talk about these athletes as a whole, the really cool thing about track and field is there are 21 different events for track. You have throws, you have horizontal jumps, vertical jumps, sprints, and distance. And obviously the amount of testosterone will differ because testosterone is usually linked with more power sports and speed. And so a 10,000 meter runner doesn't necessarily need really, really high testosterone to succeed. No. And so in this study, they did break it down by event, and they tested the testosterone levels, not just by men and women, but also by event, and what they found. And they found that 5 events, the winner of those events, or the athletes who succeeded the most, did have higher levels of testosterone. That was, let's see if I remember. It was pole vault was one of them, javelin throw, 400, and then 2 other events within that too that were shorter sprints. It wasn't the 100, it wasn't the 200, but
more accelerating type.
Yeah. There were 5 events that they found where testosterone, the winner and the top 3 had higher levels of testosterone. But in this new 2018 policy, they're only testing 400 to mile runners. They're not testing pole vault. They're not testing javelin. They're only testing 400 to mile.
And not the throwers?
Not the throwers, not the sprinters.
It sounds like, outside looking in, it sounds like they wanted the test, or the study to say what they wanted it to say.
Interestingly, Caster Semenya is an 800-meter runner and a 1,600-meter runner, which means that she would have to be tested. If this policy were enacted, she would have to be tested every single event for this. And that's the belief by a lot of scholars, is that this, like you said, they knew what they wanted out of this study, and they knew who they wanted to target for it too.
Yeah.
Now, real quick question for you. I think from reading your article as well, which we'll have to post along with this podcast, so people can read up on it, what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
And more of your great mini articles is that the interesting thing, which could be argued too, that maybe the long distance athletes may not have performed as well as the other ones in the shorter distance explosiveness, but you could argue that the recovery was accelerated because of the higher testosterone. But what I was going to say was, I think I read in the report, it was the one that you sent me or a different one, that the testosterone levels didn't carry over into performance. Was that right?
Yes. So the other issue with this study,
is interesting.
Yeah, so beyond the whole not being able to replicate the data, the policy not actually reflecting what they found in this research, there's actually no evidence that testosterone is linked to better performance.
Which blew my mind, yeah.
In, like period? Like in general? Or just in like...
Mind fucking blown.
In what context? Like, is there context around that?
I've not done enough research in it, but I know in track and field, if you look, and I've looked to try to find this research about testosterone leading to higher performance, there's no data there, actually.
Is it because it's hidden, or because are they trying to...
There's just no direct link to...
Russia.
Yeah. Maybe, honestly, this
They have it all.
there's actually no evidence that shows testosterone will actually increase your performance. There are ways that it'll change how your body operates and things that could contribute to better performance, but there is no direct link between testosterone and performance.
So it gives you maybe the potential to, but it probably still depends on the athlete, right?
Right, and the sport.
Yeah.
And
that makes okay. That makes sense.
In track and field too, there's so many different events, from like throwing, jumping,
Yeah.
middle distance to the long distance, where I think, just from common sense, that a thrower would benefit more from using testosterone than a
400 meters.
marathoner.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, like, with just that great diversity within that one sport, maybe it's hard to pin that down.
Yeah, it is. And so the other issue is the fact that the IAAF chose to only test the 400 to the 1600, and they're only testing women too. And so
But they didn't test the guys?
this policy wouldn't test men.
Why?
It's only for women.
It's just for women, yeah.
Yep, it's just for women. And so
Well, I guess still, I would think like if they want the study to be locked in,
Right.
why
Yeah,
not do
well,
both
that's your
sexes,
point.
right? Like
And so, I'm sorry, I'm kind of hung up on this. So why did, I'm confused as to why they didn't, do the nude parade with the guys as well as the females, but
That's fucked up,
What
right?
was the main problem? Because primary sex characteristics, to me, that's kind of just like a no-brainer, right?
Yeah,
Like a
sure,
big
yeah,
giveaway.
yeah, yeah.
So why have we started to try to find different ways to identify it? Because it's less invasive, less embarrassing, or is there something else to it?
Yes
Hold
to
on.
all of that, yeah.
Can I ask these guys one question to follow up and let her answer that?
Yeah.
I want to blow your minds. This blew my mind.
Okay.
Today. How many sexes do you think are out there?
I think there are
two?
two.
Okay.
I think
Two that I know of. I don't know. I haven't.
Okay.
I've met a lot. I know
Okay,
women,
so
but
yeah,
that's all I
from-
know.
2 from Tyler.
I think
Nick?
there's three. I think there's male, female, and then I think there's some anomalies out there.
Yeah, I
That,
agree.
like where they legitimately
Okay.
are a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Anna, blow our minds.
Yeah, so actually, before I answer, so the third category you're talking to is intersex. And so
Intersex.
that's actually where my research is
Yep.
primarily. It's in intersex athletes. So it's more than 2 and 3. So in 1993, Ann Fausto Sterling wrote a book called The 5 Sexes, which called for 5 sexes, not just 2, not just 3, but 5. Most recently, the numbers I've heard are 11 or 13 different sexes when you take all the different characteristics of sex into mind. And so it's understood that 5 is bare minimum. It's probably closer to 11 or 13 is what I've heard.
Can we roll through Spark Notes on this?
Yeah. So
Sure, yeah.
Blowing my mind right now.
Yeah, so of course we talk about obviously external genitalia, men, women, penis, vagina, super easy, testes, etc. But there's also internal genitalia.
Testes, that was good. Sorry, keep going.
So this is more like a psychological part of it. Am I right? Or is it chemical?
Oh, no,
how do
this
they?
is biological. This is
Yeah.
written in biology. Yep.
Fucking A,
So
okay.
you have external genitalia, you have internal genitalia, you have chromosomes, you have hormones, you have reactions to puberty, you have body fat percentage, you have muscle mass. You have so many different factors that go into whether or not you're quote man, quote woman. And to assume that everyone, just because you have a vagina, you're going to have 46 XX chromosomes, you're going to have higher levels of estrogen, you're going to have this, that, that's just not the way it works out a lot of times. Because even though we have these categories, when we're in the womb, our body doesn't know that. And so sometimes things underdevelop, sometimes things overdevelop. And then within that, even if you have a vagina, well, how big is your vagina? That can change too. How deep is it? That adds another dimension in that too. Penises, micropenises, what happens here and there. Testes, is one underdeveloped? Is one overdeveloped? Gonads, do you have both of them? Are they connected properly? So there's a lot of different factors that go into man and woman, and the variations create asterisks by man and woman as well.
So we kind of have categories: man, woman. I don't want to try to fit what you're saying into my
It's okay,
perspective and
it's
stuff,
okay.
but could it be that there's man, woman, and intersex, and that these are variations of man, woman, and intersex, or are there? I mean, can all of them mate with all of them, or
Yeah, so that's I think one understanding of it. Another way that people look at sex too is not obviously, but typically in general society, if you can have a baby, you're a woman. If you can't have a baby, or if you can get people pregnant, you're a man. And that's pretty much yeah, sure, live your best life. You keep doing you. If you want to do that, you keep doing you. In sport, though, we have something totally different. Who really cares if you can or can't have a baby? What matters is how fast you are, how much can you lift, how good are you, where are you? Are you blowing away the competition, or are you a lot slower than the competition? It's a very competition-based separation, and so that's where it gets tricky to find the way to divide men and women. It's no longer how big is your dick, how deep is your vagina. No one really cares anymore unless it relates to performance then. And so that's why they started moving towards testosterone, because they wanted to use performance as the separation between men and women. Yep.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because I feel like I'd like to think it's safe to say that in your general life, it doesn't really matter. Like if you're passing someone on the street, like however, if they're a man or a woman, it doesn't really affect you at the end of the day.
No.
But if you're lining up on the start line with someone who looks like they're going to kick the crap out of you, that's when people start to care, when it might affect your performance then.
It's so hard to draw a line there too, because those people can't help that that's the way that they were born.
Yeah, that's kind of.
They're trying, and they're being fit into the way that it's just always been done. Whereas men compete against men, women compete against women, and then I'm thinking about these generational athletes, they call them, these just superstars.
Yeah.
And how many of them were some sort of anomaly as far as this kind of stuff goes.
Absolutely. And the wild thing about intersex, I found this when I was working on a fellowship application. So the rate of intersex is the same as the rate of autism, actually, in children.
Wow.
They believe that the two rates are very similar. But the only way to really find out if you're intersex, besides like physical, like being able to see it, is through intensive tests, actually. And so why would anyone test that if by every means you look like a conventional man or a conventional woman? And so they actually think the rate's a lot higher, because if even just by identifying they think that it's the same rate as autism in children, that's just from what they can see and not even through testing necessarily.
Is this just something that has always been happening, or that we're just now able to identify it, or do you think this has something to do with like evolution and all that stuff?
Maybe a little bit of both. There is history that goes. So we have like hermaphrodites. The root hermaphrodites comes from the Greek god Hermaphistus. I write it a lot. I don't know how to say the name, but it was a Greek god that had both male and female body parts. If we even go back to ancient Sumerian literature, there's talk of this god creating a man and he shall have both male and female parts, a penis and a vagina. So intersex has been around a super, super long time. I would even argue as long as the Bible. But it's just kind of coming to light now in sport, because I think sport's it's so important in what we do, and it just shapes everything, and it's with society, and what we see in sport kind of shapes how we govern society, and especially with politics going on, with everything, we're starting to really crack down on the divide between men and women now.
That's insane. That's amazing information too.
I don't know what to say right now.
Yeah. So let's bring this back into the performance-based issue with that with the female. So let's say you said it's 5 nanograms. Is that how I best?
Nanomoles per liter.
Nanomoles per liter. Okay. So if one of these natural female athletes is naturally at 7, do they have to take medication then to lower their testosterone to compete?
Yes.
That seems very wrong.
Is that okay?
That seems very wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah, I
Do they
think
just
that's.
have to take it like?
And do they get tested for taking this? Do they get in trouble because they're taking, like Brock Lesnar recently got busted after a UFC event because he was found to have estrogen blockers or whatever in his test.
Why are you taking that?
Yeah, so I wonder, did they also get tested for that? Where they explain? Sorry, I have too many questions.
Yeah, no, you're totally fine. I'm not entirely sure how they would implement it, but I do know they have to take it for 6 consecutive months, and I would assume then they get tested again to see if it lowered their testosterone, and if it didn't, they can't compete, certainly.
Is that safe?
It's the same. I mean, no, but
does it affect your body like birth control affects some girls?
Yeah, you're gonna mess with their menstrual cycles and how their body regulates.
There's a lot of negative effects of
hell
taking
yeah.
hormone suppressors in terms of depression, in terms of mental health. Outside of just the physical, certainly your testosterone will get lower. The goal will be reached, but there are a lot of things that
Consequences.
Yeah, there are a lot of consequences in achieving one standard.
It reminds me of some of these commercials for some of these drugs. Hey, do you have athlete's foot? Take this drug, but you might get a fucking heart attack. like it doesn't make any sense. We have people who take steroids now to make it so fucking even. Now we're making people get away from their natural state and where their body should be.
Yep.
Well, I wonder
that just seems that I don't fucking.
If they're all taking the exact same one that's administered by some Olympic administration, that you can only take this to reduce it, so it's an even more level playing field, or if there's different ones that, because their bodies, like you said, have different consequences to it. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's been really amazing too, and just casual conversations that I have with people. The media around this policy has done a really good job of saying like, well, these women have higher levels of testosterone and like that's cheating and they need to like by any means if you tell someone they have a higher level of testosterone and they're kicking everyone's ass, you're gonna be like, well, yeah, like that's not fair. But when you actually get into the nitty gritty of this issue, it's pretty uncontroversial, in my opinion. I'm really lucky to work with 2 Olympian athletes out at Maryland, and I chat with them really frequently. And it's really crazy to hear their opinions on it, because they're like, well, you know what? Like, this is the way sport works, and like, if you want to play, you got to play by their rules. And I'm like, who's making these rules?
It's just one.
The
at the end of the
rules are
day,
almost archaic.
Yeah.
well, that's the thing. The rules are made by people, and people who sit behind those desks are just fucking people.
Yep.
And a lot of times, their opinions can be wrong,
Yeah, absolutely.
or what their policies are. We've kind of proven that through how many, through history, right? I'm just thinking of like I have an athlete who's 2-time, I believe, junior Olympian, and I'm like, what if her testosterone was too high and now she can't compete in Tokyo? Like, that's not fair.
Think about
She doesn't know it. She's like 16 years old.
And then think about how that transfers to that, especially at a younger age when they do find out like the emotional toll it plays on somebody where you've been fighting, scratching, working so hard, and all of a sudden you're told you're too great. We have to back you down a little bit. That would be really stressful.
And the truth is there's nothing wrong with
No.
them or that.
No,
it's just
exactly.
the social, it's just the social norms or the norms that have traditionally been.
We're trying to make things so level the playing field so much.
And then also like the time, I think that it's important to remember that the times in which these rules were created, they didn't know all of these things. You know what I mean? Like it was a little bit different, and it's just been perpetuated.
When did they? I missed. I didn't hear you when you had said earlier. Do you know when they brought the level from 10 down to 5?
When they introduced this new 2018 policy.
In 2018 was that recent? Okay.
Yep. So the policy came out. I think I wrote that piece in June that I sent you, and I think the policy had just come out in April. And actually, currently, Caster Semenya, she knew it was targeting her, and so she actually brought it to the ethical court for sport and said, "This is an abomination that this is here. This is not fair, and this policy should be revealed." So it's actually currently under review by the ethical courts for track, and the policy has been suspended until they make a ruling whether or not the IAAF can actually implement it or not.
Her.
Yeah, and so she had an amazing team. She's an amazing athlete, and this is just really not fair that this is happening to her. And it's amazing that she also brought it then to people who could make changes for it. And so we're waiting to see whether or not they actually listen to the science and listen to what's going on.
Whenever it comes to that kind of stuff, you're dealing with people who don't necessarily understand the biology and stuff, and it's really tough to make that argument to those types of people.
Yeah, the crazy part to me is the policy based on the science and that study that has all those flaws, it was written by like PhDs, MDs, biologists by training, and this is still like the product that they came out with.
Do you think they had?
Is that something that you could think maybe sometimes just empirical evidence doesn't work to its fullest? Just because as humans we make flaws.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And like the thing is, like that totally happens. There were mistakes like not removing doped athletes. I don't understand that mistake, but at the end of the day, like human error, like you said, we're all human. We're all people who make mistakes. So have more studies, have more science. Don't just come up with this one study and then base a policy on it that doesn't even actually reflect the science that was found.
Yeah, if that's the case, then there's plenty of studies out there that are shit that we can do stuff with, right?
Well, could there be an agenda behind it? There's a reason they're obviously.
Absolutely.
That's not.
It's like, are they getting?
There's got to be some,
like,
maybe something you're trying to cover from us, from letting us know the reasons why.
Sure, you give me a bunch of money, I'll put together a shit study.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
So
in that study too. So in every single peer-reviewed study, you have to say any funding that you've gotten just for conflict of interest. And if you look at the bottom of that study, they were actually sponsored by the IAAF.
Okay, there you go.
In that particular study, they were supposed to use a third-party external person to have no sway. They were actually funded by the very people that are trying to implement this policy. And so you have a conflict of interest then in that study as well.
That shouldn't have made it anywhere. Like that shouldn't have made it.
That's just like, well, not to that level, but like NSCA, number one contributors, Coca-Cola. Like, come on.
So let me ask you about the sport performance you talked about.
Yeah.
How it's interesting how the only thing I can think of from what I can, I guess, compare it to is kind of like how if the testosterone didn't directly relate to the sport performance, it's almost the argument with the Barry Bonds, Mark McGuire's, and Sammy Sosa's, back when they were hitting all the home run records and beating Roger Maris and whatnot, is the argument was, well, the steroids had to help them because now they have the power or the same ability to get through it, or if they never took any of that stuff, well, they still have broken home run records as well. Now, I wonder if, obviously, with these athletes as well, if maybe not the performance on that day, but the recovery benefits they got were so much more quicker and replenishing themselves than the other athletes who were naturally producing it, but not as high as these other ones were. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting, like, considering, so a question I get a lot is like, okay, so like, this study is fucked up, the policy is fucked up, so what is the solution?
You had me in 2 seconds. That's fucked up, dude. Sorry.
And so the question is always, so what's the solution? And that's where I defer to my academic answer and say, well, we need more research. But the really tricky part, I think, about sport is, sure, like maybe testosterone is linked to performance. Maybe it does enhance performance. But what about height? What about body fat percentage? Michael Phelps's arms are as long as this room, probably. And that contributed very much so to his success. So if we consider testosterone as this performance divider, why don't we look at other factors too? Like, why don't we look at height? Why isn't there a height limit if you're above 6 feet? Like, you're a man.
No, you're right. It's because it's naturally occurring in the body for these people, right?
Your body fat percentage?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
if you're above
Like, hey, bro,
7%.
your legs are too long. Get lost.
Well,
it's
honestly, though, like, you think about college recruiters when it comes to sports, like whether it's
They
football
look
or
for certain
basketball,
things, man.
they're looking for someone with a wider frame, with long, to build all that upon. So
Exactly.
different areas, it's a plus, and so it's crazy.
Exactly. So there's just so many different factors, I think, and it just makes it really hard to find a quote solution. But at least I know, like, from an ethical side, treating athletes like this isn't just. It isn't fair. It isn't fair in the name of sport. You can't treat people like this and say, like, well, it's all for sport. It's all for an equal playing field. Sport was never an equal playing field at the end of the day. Michael Phelps is really tall. He's really long. Usain Bolt has a really low body fat percentage and has legs that are also as long as his room, probably. It's never been a fair
If we look
playing
at the
field.
weightlifting world, those people that have long torso, short femur.
Exactly. Like, what are you going to say? Like, oh, you have a Chinese guy whose mechanics are perfect. And then, like Lu Jiajun, and all of a sudden you have, an American whose mechanics are shit, right? But we all know the Chinese use PEDs anyways. But all of a sudden you're going to be like, no, you're not good enough. Like, it just doesn't...
Or that your arms are too short, you cannot bench press today.
Yeah, right?
You're going to lift too much, right?
I think it's really interesting. I've heard this argument before. I don't have any data to back it, but I've heard like.
You didn't write an article on it?
Well, if you go look at open powerlifting, you can see the totals for USAPL. Again, USAPL is drug tested, it's not drug free. However, at the time of those competitions, the top level athletes are tested and they're not on anything at that time.
Yeah.
And then you can look at the untested federations as well, and the differentiation in the 1 through 10 between USAPL and the untested is not as significant as you think it would be.
Right.
There's cases where the untested people are higher than the the tested people are higher than the untested people, and so I think. To your point, is testosterone the big thing that differentiates in performance?
Right.
I don't think it necessarily is, because there are some people out there who are the exception, who can naturally do things that are incredible.
Yeah.
But I also think that we can't rule out the anecdotal evidence that people that we see use steroids make incredible progress over a short period of time. So maybe it brings up the middle and not necessarily the top end, or maybe those people who are natural anomalies and they use performance enhancing drugs get to the a little bit taller or a little bit higher up on that level. But I don't think it's as easy as saying that across the board, if you inject testosterone, you're going to be world class.
Yep.
Hell no.
No.
Yeah, 100%.
If that were the case, I would not be here right now, probably. Actually, well, that's not here.
Whoa.
I would be injecting. I'd be going NFL, baby. So let's go. Let's
Absolutely.
loop
If
up.
it was that, if there was just a one-cut solution, the world of sport would be totally changed as we see it. I mean, we would be seeing numbers that are incredible, but it has to be, like you said, it has to be more than just testosterone that's linking to great performances.
So they had to have created this with a purpose, right? So is the overall purpose of this level to send a message to future athletes who are playing with dope or maybe doping, to eliminate everything at such a hard level? Is that the purpose behind it, do you think? Is it not really to exclude or push away these amazing female athletes currently, but to really set a regulation for the future ones to come, even though they're going to be impacting these current athletes? I mean, do you think that's might be part of the purpose behind it? I'm just trying to figure out, like, the purpose is there for a reason. Was it just to push away the top-end ladies naturally, or is it to set a message to everyone else, like, if you want adult, you don't have a chance? So, I mean, the purpose
I don't know. It seems like they're trying to maybe, the way I look at it is, I get what you're saying, but, like, steroids are such a problem in sports that I feel like they're reaching for something that is causing a worse effect, or like the outcome is worse on the athletes. You know what I'm saying?
It doesn't even necessarily need to be. Yeah, I understand. It doesn't even need to be steroids. So look at Lance Armstrong and the blood doping. So there's always a different PED.
Well, then maybe they need to test better for those things, rather than be like, oh, dude, you're a 6 on the, like, let's say 6 out of 5. You're over. You got to take this stuff. You're gonna have effects from it. I don't think that's fair.
No, it's not. I totally agree.
Just because the guy next to you is taking stuff, so you might have to do this because this asshole's taking steroids and you're in the Olympics. Right.
I think also there's, it's important to remember that there's this constant search for the right training program and the right protocol, and we don't know what it is yet. And it's different all over the world. And if you, I know people that use performance-enhancing drugs in the powerlifting world, and the first thing that you hear when you're talking in those circles is like, does it work? Does it work? Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, you got to take into consideration that there's a lot of times when these people's training programs are fucking awful.
They're terrible.
They're fucking stupid. Like, it's just terrible.
Yeah.
And they take those and they make progress that most people can make naturally.
Yeah, and they train like assholes.
They just train like, it's like fucking stupid. Like,
no, I'd agree with that too. Like all of a sudden, just because you take something, you might make yourself better, but is it in the short term, or is this going to be something that's going to help you long term?
There was a study that I was telling Tony about yesterday that I learned in my undergrad classes, and it said, basically, if I'm remembering correctly, they interviewed several division, I don't remember how many, but several Division I athletes, and they said, if we took 5 years off of your life, but you could win a national championship, would you do it?
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. 100%.
Let her keep
Sign
going.
me up. Sorry.
Let her keep going. Let her
Then
keep
the
going.
follow-up question was, if we took off 10 years of your life and you were a 4-time consecutive national champion, would you do it?
Yes.
And 95% said yes.
95.
That's incredible.
95.
Would you? Would you?
Tony?
You telling me I'd die at 70 instead of 80? Fuck yes.
When you ask me at 17 or 18, yes.
Yeah.
You ask me today at 35, no. Well, actually,
He's like, well,
You're still out on that one,
but
guys.
here's the thing that I argue with you on that. I think it's the scary thing with that is, and maybe it's changed now. I don't really know too much about that, the science behind it, the techniques, what you're supposed to be doing. But even in areas here, you hear about all the time these really, strong power lifters and Olympic lifters that made these great strides really quickly are dying in their early 40s, right? Sure. So I think you think about 10 years, people are thinking, I'd die rather at 75 than 85. But I feel like it's a huge gateway drug when you get into some sort of PED that accelerates other stuff. Yep. So a lot of times, unless you can control that, where you're secure enough, you're smart enough, you have a good group of people around you to control it, it gets out of control, and you end up taking so much stuff that your heart bursts when you're 41.
Yep.
So I think that's the thing that I think about now versus, you're not dying at 75 or 65, 10 years younger, but you're dying in your early 40s.
It's your quality of life. And I also think, like you were talking about when you take these hormone suppressors, are there negative side effects? There are a lot of negative side effects to PEDs. So maybe when you're 17, 18, if you want to have kids, you're not thinking about that, but you start getting into that, it starts messing with you. Can you have kids then in 10 years if you want them? What happens there? Are you going to be able to remember anything that happened? Are you going to be able to keep up this training ethic that you've developed? Are you even developing a training ethic? Or are you just going home and pounding creatine every single night?
Sorry. Keep it. We're going to bring that up later. We're going to bring that up later.
That was my segue into creatine.
Okay,
man, we're going to be here for hours.
Real quick, do you guys have, I'll let Anna finish, but do you have anything else that you want to bring up on the testosterone piece in sex?
Well, I have a question.
Olympics?
Do you know where the hell is this going? You're just in limbo. It's just waiting.
We're just waiting to hear if Caster Semenia's appeal and call for this unethicality of this policy is good or not. We should hear back They were supposed to hear back on March 25th, but they extended it to mid-April now.
So what do you want to see happen?
I would like to see it repealed.
Obviously, but like
yes.
I mean, moving forward, like what kind of system do you think would work better?
What's the solution?
Yes.
I think
And not more testing or not more research.
We need more research.
no. I think if you want to have a division between men and women's athletics, I mean, no one's going to argue. I don't think anyone that I know that's in a proper state of mind would argue that women and men are on the same playing field. And if you made it a free-for-all for men and women, there is some kind of biological difference between men and women. But what that biological difference is still uncertain. So I think there needs to be more research done. Research is the solution. But I think there needs to be more research done into what exactly are those performative differences. And not necessarily setting a limit, but finding like where a soft line is between the two, and not forcing women to take hormone suppressors if they cross this magical line of 5 nanomoles per liter. I think there needs to be more policies done with the well-being of athletes kept in mind.
Yeah, because where does it? This is almost a gateway to something that could turn really bad.
Yeah.
You think about it. We started talking about body
Extreme,
mechanics,
yeah.
levers. Also, what if we get into mental aspects?
Exactly.
Like, hey, this person's. What if they find, I don't know, some kind of chemical where this person's mentally tough, this one's weak?
Yeah.
I'm totally snowballing here, but
No,
I'm just
you're
saying, that could be, this is in 20, 30 years, this could be
Yeah.
a dangerous place.
It has actually.
Yeah.
Athletes have committed suicide from previous sex tests, and that's why they ended them. They found athletes who were trying to commit suicide were committing suicide,
Wow.
not just from failing these tests, but from the backlash that the media painted them as. They painted one athlete as a sex test failure. They called an athlete a he for she or something. They call these athletes names in the media, and that's devastating. Your whole career is gone, everything that you've worked for, and now you're painted as some anomaly out there. And so there have been not just career ends, but life ends also as a result of these policies.
Okay, so
So on that note,
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I'm blown away. I did not know. I've cut myself off from the news, actually, just politics, all
I
this
don't
shit.
blame you.
Because the world is a very fucked up place, and when you
Yep.
hear things like this, it makes you kind of sick to the core,
Yeah.
which is that feeling I have right
it's
now.
horrible. Yeah, it is. But
I'm astonished right now
Yeah.
by all that.
But so let's do this right now. Let's transition to another topic.
All right.
This one was amazing.
Thank you.
And we're obviously, now that we have to have you back again in the future. Because
Absolutely, once it's
every time.
policy,
Yeah.
When you're moving back to
Yeah.
Minnesota, you're a regular.
Absolutely, I'll be here this summer.
Perfect. We'll have to get you back once a month in the summer to talk about more stuff.
Absolutely.
But let's transition and do another really highly controversial topic right now, subject. We were talking about
my
this-
favorite supplement.
We were talking about this yesterday. I let them know so they had an idea. We talked about this a little bit earlier yesterday, where the controversial topic of creatine,
Yes.
which used to be super popular, it still is. I mean, the top of these Bang energy drinks tell you super creatine. Super creatine.
best
So,
kind.
Yes.
what is, and I think it might even be banned by the NCAA or high school leagues too. I gotta look that up, but I know I've seen
Which I would have been, my ass would have
It
been
is
kicked
not
out because I
banned.
took it in high school.
creatine, a legal dietary supplement, is not banned by Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, or NCAA.
Really?
I did hear
But
about the NCAA.
okay, so
Wait,
what-
NCAA is now too?
no, it's not. They are
Oh,
not
it's
banning
Oh, I
it.
thought it was.
Oh,
No,
okay.
they are not. Now this is by the
My whole
New
fucking
York Daily
team
News,
took
so
this
this
shit.
is- But I'll let Anna go on and give us your thoughts, knowledge, experience, and
like
then we'll
nervous
kind of
now.
fight back.
You were gonna ruffle feathers.
Yeah. No, you're fine. You're
I guess
fine.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
I had a really awesome mentor. I'm gonna start with a little history before I jump into it. But I had a really awesome mentor in undergrad who taught me everything I know about training programs, conditioning programs, and everything supplements and everything to do with performance. I'm really grateful to him, Zach Rourke. He's at Eau Claire Lacrosse right now. But one of his extra credit questions on one of our exams was, why is creatine bad for you? And so my upbringing in regards to creatine, because I never took pre-workout as an athlete, I just started taking BCAAs because they taste good and I need to drink more water. And so that's my entire flirtation with supplements. Because learning about creatine, I was taught, and I learned in reading more about it, that it's actually really bad for you. And if you take too much, it can have really deadly and dangerous side effects. And a lot of times people aren't educated on what is the proper amount of creatine to take. And like we see in this Bang right over here, it's in so many different pre-workouts, energy drinks, etc. but it's not necessarily regulated in how much is in there. Like how much creatine is exactly in a bang necessarily.
Who knows?
I could see that. Like if you take a pre-workout, like let's say you take some C4.
That's a whole other conversation. Okay, so we're on creatine right now.
Well, no. Well, C4's got creatine.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying, what if you're someone who just makes a cocktail, like I do this, and then all of a sudden, and you drink a bang.
What if there's someone?
So all of a sudden, I have way too much. Okay, I can see that.
Right.
So, like, do you know, right off the top of your head, like, how much creatine is in, like, a 6-ounce steak?
Oh gosh, I don't know off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Okay.
Does anyone here?
I don't, but I was just, I mean, what if I eat a pound of steak a day? Well, 2 pounds of steak a day, 5 pounds of steak a day. Would that be more than the typical 5 grams of creatine supplementation that a person typically takes? And we're talking about it being kind of dangerous. Like, what is dangerous? Like, can you put some numbers to that?
Well, real quick, there is 5 grams of creatine in an uncooked steak.
So what if I eat, let's say that it denatures or whatever, and like I get 2 grams out of it, and I have 4 of those a day.
Unfortunately, I cannot put the numbers to it. I probably could 4 years ago when I took this class, but I forgot to do my homework and review on the numbers for creatine.
How dare you? You knew
I
this was
know,
going to be here 4 years later.
I
Our millions of viewers, subscribers,
Listeners.
I do know though that if you're not careful about the amount of creatine that you take, whatever that magical line is, it can be really bad for your liver. I believe we discussed. And it's also massively dehydrating too.
And I heard for your kidneys as well.
Yeah,
kidneys.
kidneys.
I've always heard the kidneys are.
Yeah. And so my concern when talking about creatine is if it's not regulated in like high school athletics, what kind of 16-year-old guy particularly, not just, I mean, women take supplements too, but like I'm thinking predominantly like massive meathead football guy who wants to.
So she's just poking
You're
the
talking
finger
to
at.
3 of
You're
us.
talking to 3 of us right now.
Like we just put 1 scoop is good, 3 is better.
Yeah.
Well, especially because creatine back in the day, I remember buying it when I was like 16.
Yeah, exactly.
They had a loading phase.
Oh yeah, it's like.
And I remember I was taking it. I'm like, this is terrible. I was pissing all the time.
Yeah.
Like,
I just read a book not too long ago, carb backloading.
Yeah.
It's been a couple of years.
Yeah.
By Ed Kiefer, and he talks about in his book about doing up to 20-some grams of creatine a day. And that's when I found out that creatine monohydrate does not work for me. I started doing that, and
makes you bloated
my
as
guts
shit, man.
were fucked up. And
Was it tough to sleep doing that too, because of all the carbs at night?
I guess I didn't. I don't remember. Okay. That's about the time that I did start having trouble sleeping. Like that was one thing that I kind of kept was backloading the carbs in the evening.
Okay.
And so I can't tell you if that's when it started or not, but anyways, so I noticed that I started having a lot of digestive issues. I had diarrhea for a week and a half. I'm kind of stupid before I figured it out. That like, hey, it's the creatine, you know. But
I think it's really hard. Like when you want to excel at a sport. I mean, talking about people taking years off of their lives to succeed at their sport, and so I mean, a lot of people are willing to put up with a lot to succeed and excel at their sport. And a lot of times for especially younger athletes, you don't have like the bigger picture in mind, like how is this going to affect me when I'm 25, when I'm 35, when I'm 50, and also like there's not a lot of information around how much, like the fact that I can't even put numbers to this, and this is like somewhat what I study, is evidence itself of like if I don't know if anyone else would actually do this research, just like, oh well, there's a scoop here, like I'm gonna just put a couple in, like I should be fine, I'm young, I'll be okay.
And what I found too, just from I never really dabbled in creatine at all, just but what I found from teammates who would do, they would use it in high school and college sports, and then when the training was done for whatever sport that was, or the weightlifting into the sport, when they quit using it, I just think, like, I could be wrong in this, but I think they became dehydrated and they would always cramp up or pull a muscle.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like it used to be more than not the creatine takers than. So that's why I always kind of stayed away from it. You saw more guys cramping up.
He's saying that because I cramped up my freshman year.
You're a perfect example.
And I
I
made the conscious decision to try and go off a few weeks prior. But our first week of my first time of 2 days on turf in college, my freshman year, I mean, if you've trained on turf in the middle of August underneath the sun with no shade, it's like 25 degrees hotter on that motherfucker.
You gotta come off your face.
Yeah, and all of a sudden I collapsed in film, and Mad Dog had to rub my loins. So while I chugged Gatorade. It was one of the
And
best
that was a
moments of
perfect
my life.
example. Yeah, when you come off of it, you're, unless you're supplementing a lot of water, not used to it, it's gonna. I think it caused that to happen. But.
I think
No,
it's
for sure.
also assuming that people can come off of that too.
Good point.
Like for me, when I was in college, I got addicted to ibuprofen, and like I couldn't go a day without having
For pain regulation?
Yeah,
Okay.
pain. So I was taking like 8 to 12 tablets a day of ibuprofen.
That's me too. I
You're
was
so
stupid enough
little.
to-
How
yeah.
do you? Wow.
Yeah, like I was just building it up, and finally, like I was like, this is insane. And so I cut it off, and like I was in so much pain for months. But like that was assuming that I could get off of it, and I recognized that. Not to throw my boyfriend under the bus, because I know he's gonna listen to this later.
Here we go.
Sorry.
He's addicted to caffeine to the point where when he was an undergrad, he was having 1,100 milligrams of caffeine a day.
Holy shit!
next level.
I have a
Yeah.
bang and I feel guilty.
I have about 2 bangs a day I'm at right now. So
Dude,
it's
That's gonna be
600.
close to
I
1,100.
feel bad about
Yeah.
that. He was,
That's-
That's like the peak, and like now he's at between 500 and 800 a day. But that if he doesn't have it, it's just the worst experience for everyone, including himself. But for everyone.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening in. But
Well, he cut it in half then pretty
He
much.
did,
So
yeah.
that's a big step.
yeah, but he's like, I have no interest in completely going off of this. Like
Yeah.
I've been doing it for so long, I don't know how to not be on this anymore. And so this is even assuming that people, if you've developed a habit for so long, habits are almost impossible to break. Like
It's almost like it becomes part of your identity.
exactly.
Well, that gets dangerous too. Like I know for me for football, I'd be popping ibuprofen like crazy. I remember taking ibuprofen before games just to prepare for the pain.
Yep.
Right? Like, and I'm sure you. I don't know if you did the same thing. Like it's
One
just
in bed before getting out of bed.
Yeah, man. Like, well, it's one of those things. Like you said, athletes put their bodies at risk because they just don't care. I didn't care.
When we were in college,
I
we
couldn't
used to
touch my
say,
toes on a Sunday. Like, I couldn't even touch my knees on a
We
Sunday.
used to say ibuprofen means I be playing.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Like what? 800 milligrams, like 3 times a day.
You got any
minimum.
Skittles?
Yeah.
Fuck yeah. They had a little sugar coating. They're delicious.
Yeah. It's crazy to me to think about there's just so many different aspects to that. There's the marketing aspect that it tastes good. So like, meh, like sure. Like it's not like it's unpleasant to do that. There's the aspect of like targeting younger kids that develop this habit that continue it then all through their entire lives. There's this entire mantra around sports too, like being an athlete, like it kills me to say this a little bit, but like also reflecting that like you do anything to do well at your sport. You would do anything to keep doing that. But would you do anything to be able to keep playing that sport for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's where the divide is. You would
Huge.
do anything to succeed at that one moment, but would you do anything to be able to do it when you're 30, 40, 50?
And
Well,
that's what
that's-
made me contemplate the question when you asked me, would I take whatever for 4 years to win 4 years national championships? And you think about the other end, well, I'm still able to live today fairly healthy and fairly, amount of weight where it's like, I've been doing that for 15, 20 years now regularly, and I've never had to stop because of any, knock on wood, thankfully,
Yeah.
any type of issues. So it does weigh into that decision, yeah.
Yeah, and like I don't necessarily think that a 16, 17, 18-year-old who's getting ready to play in college or is a freshman in college really has that kind of big picture. This isn't at all on my research, but this is just something that now that I'm getting older, like I start thinking about like when I was a senior in high school, when I was a freshman in college, would I really have valued taking care of my body as I didn't as much
No.
as I do now.
You're not in that position to. Like, remember Rip Fuel?
Yeah.
Yeah, Redfield. Remember?
gets going.
Dude, I took that shit like candy. Like, and that's the thing. Like, all of a sudden, it took some kids dying on a football field. It was what happened to have people
Yeah.
like ephedrine pulled
Well,
because it's basically fucking meth.
Exactly.
It's actually pulled off the shelves now because that's a very scary thing. Aren't we kind of abusing all these other things too?
Right.
Absolutely. Well, I think Chad was talking with us yesterday, and we
Yeah.
can go into this a little bit too. The potential dangers of pre-workout, right? And
Yep.
he had mentioned that he saw ephedrine is being sold in some sort of drink at a local gas
Wait, are
station.
you serious?
Yeah.
Well, like,
Yeah.
Let's
I
go
can't
buy
remember,
some.
it's like ephedrine is illegal, but
Okay.
ephedra is
So there's
not.
a difference.
Oh,
okay.
And
So
so, like, you can, like, because the ECA stack, it was ephedrine, or was it the aspirin and caffeine or whatever. So this was actually studying, like, people lost a shitload of weight using the ECA stack, right?
Sure.
But now people still use that to prepare for bodybuilding competitions, different things like that. You go get something at Walgreens, and I won't say the name of it, but it's behind the counter that you can get. It has ephedra in it, which converts to ephedrine.
Yeah.
And then you just mash the caffeine and the aspirin for it.
And that's essentially a fat burner that I'm guessing?
Yeah, it's a fat burner, yeah. But you can still get it.
Yeah. And then the dangers too with the pre-workouts. Like if you're using it for the pre-workout, I think it'd be funny if we all kind of took a cold turkey on it and limit ourselves to once a week.
No, I
just
did.
Yeah.
I did drink Bangs for 2 weeks. I had fucking headache for like 4 days, but
Well,
I felt way better.
Yeah, my point is that I think
you should.
you come to the point where you rely so much. So if you walk into the gym and you don't have something, you almost can't get ready to work out unless you have it. So if you put yourself off it and save that pre-workout for 1 day a week or something, you're gonna have an amazing lift versus those other 5. But it's gonna be the intent is to not have to rely on it, if that makes sense.
Oh, I think that's good because if you shouldn't have to have a stimulant help you get ready to train,
Anna?
right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't take pre-workout. Like I said, I only take the BCAAs because they taste really good now, and I need to drink more water. Because water, I think, I've read that water is the biggest contributor to excellent performance. But I don't think that you should have to take it. Like, I know I have friends who were athletes in college, and they're like, if they don't have their pre-workout, if we travel somewhere, they're like, oh man, like I forgot my pre-workout. Like, I'm not even gonna lift. Like, this is just gonna be a waste of my time. Like, I'm
That's
not.
what I mean,
What is the point of me doing this?
Yeah.
And
Drink
I'm
a cup
like,
of coffee.
yeah, and I'm like, well, not like any kind of lift is going to be better than not lifting. So
Yeah.
like, why would you say that it's just not going to be good lift?
It's the ritual.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: what type of BCAAs do you prefer? What's the brand? What's the product? Because we got to get on the right page here.
Sure. So this is all from
If you
my
remember,
boyfriend.
you may
I
not
do
have copies.
very clearly. So my boyfriend is a big fan of Chris Gethin.
Okay.
And so I have his caged HydroCharge and his caged BCAAs.
Okay.
I feel like I've tried that. Have we tried that?
They have the supercharged.
It sounds-
I'm on
yeah.
EAAs now.
Oh, I've heard.
Essential amino acids.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I like the taste of them, and I need to drink more water. So I just, every day before my run, I have it. I don't think it's changed anything in my workouts besides the fact that I'm more hydrated now, and so I recover faster. But Dalen swears by them, and that's why in our house we only have caged muscle stuff. So it's not worth me fighting that. So
That's
I just
hilarious.
go along with it.
You know your battles. Good job.
Exactly.
Let me ask you this. So then how about, water's obviously very important. What about sleep to you? How does sleep fall in to recovery and preparation? What are your thoughts on that?
Asking this to a second-year PhD
Exactly.
student.
You get no sleep.
I think sleep and water and not being stressed are what are going to help you succeed. Usually you get to pick 2 of the 3. If even that, sometimes only 1. So when I was in undergrad, I would take naps religiously, and I was, I think, more well-rested than ever in my life. But I have noticed if I don't sleep, I'm actually in pain usually in my workouts. Like, my knees hurt, my feet hurt. This is all running, obviously. I run every day. But I'm in more pain. My workouts aren't as good. I'm tired. It takes a lot more effort to actually get there. And so I think I stand by sleep and water being the 2 biggest reasons or biggest contributors to success at the end of the day.
Gotcha.
Everyone should sleep if you can, and if you can't, find a way, I guess. But if you still
better.
can't, be better.
Just eat a bunch of
be
fats
better.
and protein.
I always have thought that was funny, listening to like a lot of the self-help stuff, or like when you listen to these people that yell at you about motivation, like, you gotta fucking do shit, you gotta wake up at 3 a.m., go to bed at midnight, and this and that. Like,
They're so full of shit.
they're
so full of shit.
You're just full of shit. You can like.
I don't like listening to people. No, they have some good insight, don't get me wrong, like on certain things. But then I'm like, what's your day like?
Yeah.
Motherfucker, you have millions of dollars. How much do you actually work?
Not to mention that, like, when people don't sleep, like, their brain looks like they've been in, like they've had traumatic brain injury.
I think I remember seeing that.
Yeah. And I think it takes as little as, like if you sleep less than, and I can't remember, this is an old Barbell Shrug podcast where they were talking to a Navy SEAL who's a physician now who studies sleep. And it was something like less than 7 hours is when these things start to present themselves.
Yeah.
And then you hear these CEOs like, I don't fucking sleep. It's like, well, what are you really doing on a day-to-day basis? If that's true, you know what I mean? But like, how can a person function like that?
Exactly. And like if you even think about it, 7 days in a week, if you are trying to get 8 hours of sleep every night and you get 7 hours of sleep every night, that's one less hour. After a week, that's 7 hours of sleep that you've missed out on. That's an entire night's sleep. Yeah. And so even just like missing like a day here and there, it happens, but like if it's cumulative over a long course of time, it adds up. And even from a coaching perspective, what coach wants to coach a sleep deprived kid?
Exactly.
Like,
pain in the ass.
Well, that or have you been sleep deprived and coached?
Yeah,
or tried to do your job? Like, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Get your sleep, because I've found you're way more productive.
You're
Exactly.
more effective.
Yeah, you get way more done in a shorter period of time.
Exactly.
Right?
So what do you have coming up this, what's new for you? You get your PhD test you're taking. Anything else you're looking forward to for yourself on the Arise coming up for you in the near future?
Sure. So I'm actually finishing up. I had a piece come out that is forthcoming in July that I published on this policy, kind of looking at the ethics of it. I have 2 other papers in preparation that will hopefully be submitted. My deadline for myself is May 1st. So hopefully those will be published this summer as well.
Wow.
And then, like I said, I have my qualifying exams at the end of this summer where if I pass them, I get to do my dissertation. If I fail them, I'm kicked out. So I have those at the end of this summer. But other than that, I just write a lot. I read a lot. I work out every day. I teach too. Actually, I'm a lecturer for a senior level class in public health. So I deal with students every day too.
I should have asked, what don't you do?
Yeah.
I don't do creatine. I don't do
Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's amazing. I'm so glad you combined stop with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
And this was
really
just the
fun.
beginning.
Awesome.
We have to have you back again for other topics, for what you've written on or studied about or know that can enlighten us and all of our listeners. Do you guys have any other questions at all? Or
No, this is awesome.
This is amazing. Yeah, I can't wait to get you back.
let me ask you this, Anna.
Yeah.
How can people contact you, or if they just want to learn more about you? Are you on Instagram or Facebook or anything? People can
On the IG.
follow you.
Yeah, I'm
the
on
Instagram?
I'm on Twitter. My Twitter is Anna Posbergh. My last name is Posbergh. I'm on Instagram too. It's Bergie55, and then my email. I'm probably the best at email too.
Okay.
It's my last name Posbergh@umd.edu.
Awesome. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
coming
much.
out. I
That was
hope
awesome.
everybody enjoyed this, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for having me.